Like we're live everywhere. Welcome, welcome, Laura, and welcome everyone. Welcome back to the Silverlake Priestess Podcast. My name is Jaime Black, and I'm so happy to be here. This is our first night streaming live on YouTube and on Twitch. So please say hi if you're seeing us from those different platforms. We usually stream on Facebook, and so hopefully you can all see us from there. We have some exciting things to talk about tonight. Get all the way full screen. And so I'll just say this is a podcast that you can find it's on Spotify, it's on iTunes, but we're now doing a live show. And so we're going to do the live show every Sunday night at 7 p.m. And I'm going to have different magical guests such as Laura come and join me. And we're going to talk about topics that I think are important, or at least just things that are inspiring to me. So Laura was the second guest that I had on the show when I started this a couple years ago. And so I always say to her, she's an activator. Like, she activates me. And I found her on Instagram, and she was doing a course on womb education called I Love My Yoni. And something just like pulled me into that, and it was amazing. All of the things that we don't know, like all of the things that us women, regardless of our age, I mean, we all keep getting older, right? Like, I'm in my 40s and I'm like, how do I not know this? There's things that I keep learning. So I attribute so much of my current knowledge to my work with Laura. I took her course. I ended up taking other courses that she had after that. I went to her Red Tent Priestess activation training up in Ashland, Oregon. That was so magical and juicy and such an amazing experience of Laura and sisterhood and dancing with snakes. And then I was just so inspired to bring her and a Priestess Grail as well, and some other magical sisters here in Los Angeles, to bring them together here in LA. And we had a Red Tent Priestess activation training, and it was amazing. So Laura has this Red Tent, creating bleeding spaces, womb education, blood mysteries, all of this. This is work that has called to her from a very young age, and she's been growing with this work. And so we had her on the podcast, and what were we talking about? Like, what are the blood mysteries is the episode. If you want to go back and find it, it was great. And so anyway, Laura's got a bunch of her work going on right now in a way that she's in this new environment where it's really a time for education, and it's really a time for people, all of us, taking a look at what really matters to us and what is the work that we're wanting to do, because it's like everything's come to this standstill, or did anyway, right, in the summer. And so anyway, Laura, I'm going to get into asking you some questions that I'm talking just about you, but thank you for being here with me. And I'm so inspired by the work that you do, and you're such an educator. So I can't wait to get into this conversation tonight.
Thank you so much, Jaime. Just thanks for loving me up and inviting me into the space, holding the space for us. It's so fun to think about that first time that we connected in the Love My Yoni circle. And it feels like it was so long ago. And I don't know, it was probably just 3 or 4 years ago, but I'm so grateful for what brought us together, and that we get to continue weaving and playing together. It's so fun. So thanks for having me back on the show.
You're welcome. I was just at one of your webinars, which it was really like an incredible teaching, this webinar, but it was about, what you're offering, and you were sharing your story. And, I asked you before about, your story about identifying as a priestess, and like what that, you coming into that work in your lifetime and this lifetime, and what that's been like for you. But it was new for me to hear your story about how you started with the Red Tent. And if you want to just do like a brief touch up on what is the Red Tent for anyone that's new to this conversation and listening to it. But I would love for you to share that story with us.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I love storytelling. So just to preface, what is the Red Tent? Well, the Red Tent is essentially a modern revisioning of an ancient practice of the menstrual tent. And the menstrual tent is a thing that existed in all cultures that we know of. Actually, in all lineages of human that we know of, there's evidence of a menstrual tent. And practically, this was a structure that people would go into when they were bleeding, to have a place where they can sit on the earth, where they can, menstruate, where they can slow down and rest and be together. And in many of these cultures, this is a place where they would go to have ritual, to be present with the ceremony of bleeding, and likely many other rites of passage as well. So the Red Tent was first coined in the early 90s when Anita Diamant wrote a book that was called The Red Tent. And maybe if you're listening, you might be familiar with this. It became very, very popular. It became very popular amongst a wide range of people, like including book clubs and very mainstream people and more fringe people. It was really widespread. And it really struck a chord of resonance and remembrance with many people who felt this connection to coming together to bleed, and specifically coming together under a certain moon phase, whether that's the dark moon or the full moon, and menstruating together in synchrony with the moon. So in the modern day now, that really sparked a big menstrual empowerment revolution and the Red Tent movement. What Red Tents look like now, at their core, they are circles. They are some sort of gathering and circle where people come together. Beyond that, there's a lot of openness and flexibility, and the circle changes dependent on who is facilitating it. So it might be a very ritualistic space where we are honoring our menstruation. We are circling up with menstrual blood in the center of the altar. We are setting intentions and releasing things that no longer serve, and then are making an offering of menstrual blood back to the earth. Or perhaps it's a little bit more about just community support and sharing, and it's a group of people who come together and share food and share their stories. So there's many different ways that the Red Tent can look. Another facet of them that is often present, but not always, is the practical bleeding space aspect. So that is having that space where we can go to care for ourselves and our bodies when we are menstruating, and kind of bridging that ancient practice of the menstrual tent with the realities of living in a modern world, and being able to nurture both of those parts of our humanity and of our menstrual experience. So that's a little bit about what the Red Tent is. How I came to this work. For the first time I got my period, it was on the day that my grandmother passed away. I was 12 years old, about to turn 13, and I was so pissed. I was so confused. I was not excited to have my period. Later in life, it did start to feel very aligned and very special to me that I did receive my blood for the first time on the day that my grandmother passed through to the other side. I reclaimed my connection with menstruation through new moon ceremonies. Actually, I was guiding new moon intention setting ceremonies for people in my community, and they weren't just women, they weren't just womb carriers. These were all different kinds of people, all different kinds of bodies and gender identifications. And we were simply setting our intentions for the new lunar cycle. I quickly noticed that I was bleeding every time I was having people over for these ceremonies, and I just felt like there is something more there. What is that? And I did a Google search, and I found that many people used to bleed together under the dark moon. And that's kind of what sent me down the rabbit hole of sacred menstruation, the Red Tent, the blood mysteries. I received training from Aurora Rey-Faytera, who used to have a platform called Our Red Tent, and now she has a platform called Faytera, Faeterra. And everything deeply resonated in my body, in my bones, in my womb. just multidimensionally. I started working with my blood very intimately, giving it back to the earth, listening to it for guidance in terms of what sort of ritual I was having around my blood time, listening to my womb very deeply, really dove into womb care and vaginal care practices as a part of my spiritual journey and experience. And that has been my main guide, is my blood consistently guiding me. Very quickly, I felt a deep calling to share this with others as well, because I was seeing in my life how quickly my intentions were coming true when working with my blood, how efficiently I was able to move through shadows and transmute thought patterns that were no longer serving me and do this deep ancestral healing. I was viscerally experiencing the transformation that was occurring in my life when I was connecting with my blood in an intentional and sacred way. And so I wanted to share this with others. One of the places that I was most connected in at the time was in music festivals. And so I started bringing Red Tent spaces to music festivals as both educational temple spaces and practical bleeding spaces where we could have a safe, hygienic, private place to take care of our cycles, to give our blood back to the earth if we choose, and at the very least to be able to change our cups and tampons and whatever outside of a really gross, unhygienic porta potty. I felt like this is a really important aspect of these events that claim to be conscious and transformational and to have reverence for the feminine. Let's be real about that. Let's follow through with that. And that has just continued to blossom and transform. So yeah, that's a little bit of a long-winded answer as to what has brought me to this work and what I'm doing.
Yes, thank you for sharing all of that. We want to hear all of it. Anyway, we want to hear. Something interesting. So my mother is the one that gave me the Red Tent, and I read it. I think you were saying your mom too. And I read it many, many years before getting into any of this, or before getting in touch with myself and knowing myself in any of the ways that I do now. I mean, it still spoke to me. Of course, it just does. That's the thing about that book, why so many people just, it speaks to something about the way that things were and something that we're missing and something that we yearn for. And this is just what happens when I'll start with this, just women were the ones that were called to it, and women were the ones that were like, let's create circles. And so nowadays there's like women's circles everywhere, but this is kind of like a lot of like where that was coming from. And so for my own personal journey, there was just quite a journey with me learning how to identify with myself, with my feminine aspects of myself, and love myself as a woman. I have a lot of fire, and I have a lot of what I always considered to be masculine energy. I'm a fighter, did martial arts, all of that. And so I just, for me, it was just a long process, and it just took, it took my life to get to this point where I was really like, even when I started working with you, I'm like, I'm a Scorpio. I'm about working with the chakras, and Scorpio rules the second chakra, yet I didn't ever like come from my second chakral space when I was creating things. I wasn't actually considering that I had how to use my body as a portal. And so all of this, I think we come to it and then we think that this is just like for women only. And so something that's happening now with this great awareness of this whole past year, right, is just so many things that we thought that we knew that they were a certain way. All of this information is coming to light, not just to like the ones that want to be conscious or, do this kind of work or in certain types of circles, but kind of, across the board and everywhere. And so there is this awareness that we're not just male and female, and there's so much of the rest of it that's going on. And so something too is that it's not only women that bleed And it's not only people that identify as being female that bleed. And so when I first just kind of stepped into this, it was all like very female, and it was all about women's mysteries, and it was all really focused on just women. There's something to be said for that, absolutely, where women can definitely gather and have a women's circle. But when you're talking about learning about the body and creating safe bleeding spaces for people, and really starting to acknowledge that this is important for all people, and that's something that I'm starting to, in your languaging, like you've switched your languaging to really address that. And so even the work that you're doing now, it's not all female focused. It's not just like woman focused. It's opening it up to teach all sorts of people. You know, for first it was like, because I know up in Ashland in the Goddess Temple and all of that, and you guys are, and I know that you're not there anymore, but like you were there and doing so much work there and teaching so much there. And you guys have a very like open, kind of also like radical, there's like a lot of hippie radicalness, you know, going on up there, and a lot of like really open and totally accepting, and like everyone can come and learn. It doesn't have to just be just women are here to learn. It's like we're educating everyone, but has gone from that moving even more into we're creating this space actually for everyone that needs it, and not just women. And so I would love for you to speak about this. I know that I watched you interview some people on your social media and have this conversation, and I thought it was really important, and I wanted to share it here because this is new information for a lot of people.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much, Jaime. There are so many layers to that topic and so much to share. I guess first I want to just break down some of the ideas about like, it's not just women who menstruate. Like if you're listening to this right now and that's a totally new idea for you and you're like, what does that possibly mean? That's totally cool. That's totally cool. So what we mean when we say that is that to be a woman, that's a choice. That is a gender identity that each person gets to come to on their own. You know, we can choose to identify as women, we can choose to identify as men, we can choose to identify as non-binary or agender or genderqueer or gender fluid or trans. There are so many different ways that we can choose our gender identity. And it's not something that anyone else gets to define for us. So you can have a uterus and menstruate and not be a woman. You cannot identify as a woman and still have this physiological and spiritual experience of menstruation, right? Similarly, you can have a uterus or not have a uterus and still identify as a woman. So there's a lot of nuances to this. And unfortunately, many red tents and womb healing spaces are very, very exclusive to only cisgendered women. So that's CIS gendered. That means that the anatomy that you were born with matches the gender that we assign that anatomy with culturally, and that you continue to identify with that gender. So for example, you were born with a uterus and a vagina, you were assigned female at birth, and you continue to identify as female. Or you were born with a penis, you were assigned male at birth, and you continue to identify as a man. You are a cisgendered man. So a lot of red tent spaces are exclusive to anyone other than cisgendered women. And I think that it's important to be really sensitive here because it's true that women have been oppressed, that women have been demonized for our menstruation, for our magic, for our body wisdom, for our medicine. Women have been abused and misused and taken advantage of, and our coming together is important and is powerful and is sacred. But it's just also important for us to look at our exclusionary practices. And when does protecting the sisterhood or protecting womanhood actually cross a line? And it is doing more harm than it is good. So it's interesting because you talked a little bit about my process, and definitely my language is always evolving. I want to be as inclusive as possible and also as accurate as possible in terms of what I offer. So, and describing what I offer. So I have always, anytime I've brought a red tent to a gathering, it is always gender expansive, has been my intention, is that anyone can come and use this bleeding space. If you're bleeding, you're welcome to use it, whatever you identify or don't identify as on the gender spectrum. So I've always had that intention and held that space. However, my language has not always been in alignment with that intention. And so just realizing that talking about the women's mysteries, even using words like womb bin, talking about women and sister circle as opposed to red tent circle. These are signals that this is not an inclusive space, that this is not a gender expansive space, and rather this is a red tent that upholds the dangerous and harmful cis and heteronormative ideologies that our mainstream culture as a whole is indoctrinating all of us into. So through the process, through continuing to do my deep inner work that's necessary to decolonize my own thought process, to look at the ways that that I have operated in the gender binary, and continuing to broaden my perspective, to learn from educators who are all on different aspects of the gender continuum, and really hearing the voices and the stories of people like trans men who may still menstruate, but would never be invited into your typical red tent because of the way that they appear to be so masculine. Those practices actually keep this information from reaching the people who need it the most. Because yes, women have faced an incredible amount of oppression, but it's also undeniable that trans people and gender fluid people in general face way more oppression, violence, police brutality, like literal murder rates, and all kinds of terrible things, more so than women. So we're not free until we're all free. And I think that it's a really important conversation for us to be exploring. I myself am a cisgendered woman, and there is a certain amount of privilege that affords to me. And on top of that, I am a white woman in the United States of America. So there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. So therefore, I need to be doing my best to share the mic, to focalize people who have less access than me, and to do whatever big or small things I can to help create more equitable spaces. So if you want to hold circles or spaces that are for cisgendered women, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's also really worth exploring. Why is it that you want that or you need that? And is there some sort of outdated cultural belief that may be there that's informing that belief?
Mm-hmm. I had to do, I had to do that work with myself. I had to ask myself those questions, kind of part of my own journey of being able to, it's not that I didn't accept myself as a woman. It's just, I had all of these ideas about how women were weak and how compassion was weakness. And like, I never cried and, all of these things that when I started being around a bunch of women, then I only wanted that. I only wanted, and so I get that feels like a safe place, right, for just only women to be, and that it's exclusionary. And so really looking at like what is the work for, and who who needs to benefit from the work. It's just really important. So like just hearing the way that you've been sharing lately and seeing, you know, the way that you're growing with the work that you've already been doing, is important, and it's been educational, and we all need to hear this information. We're at different levels of, or different stages of our processing. And anyway, thank you for sharing about that. It does take some effort and some interest to research these things that we didn't grow up knowing about. And I think it's really important. It's really important nowadays. And this is information that's important for us to be sharing with each other. So
it really is.
Yeah. So what are you doing with your Red Tent work? Especially now that festival season is not happening this year. We're all inside, kind of, you know, what how are you being involved with this, and how are you sharing with people, you know, in regards to this? I mean, I know you've got stuff going on, so I want to like hear about, you know, what you've got going on that we want to tell our listeners about. Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely dreaming about what it might be like when events start back up again, and thinking about bringing the Red Tent and bringing Bleeding Spaces to events gives me a lot of excitement for the future. I definitely miss serving the community in that way. But other than that, I'm doing a lot of work online to engage with people on these topics and to offer support and connection with people who are serious about this work, whether they are just starting out on this journey or they have been on it for years. So 2 ways I'm doing that right now. I have a Red Tent Facilitator training that is currently open for registration and closes on January 29th. And that is an immersive 12-week course that focuses on some different aspects of Red Tent circle facilitation. So actually guiding the ritual or the circle that happens in the Red Tent. So the first month, we focus all on sacred menstruation, the blood mysteries, cycle syncing, how you can have a really healthy and empowering relationship with your cycle, be balanced in your hormones, care for your body really well, and have that grounded foundation of sacred menstruation, bridging the ancient mysteries with the modern science that we have, and really being informed and resourced so that from there you can bridge out as an educator, an advocate, a coach, a facilitator, however you take that into your work. So that's the first month. The second month, we focus on limitations to safety and intimacy in circle. So we talk a lot about gender equity. I have 2 amazing guest speakers, Gabe Morningstar, who shares a trans man's experience through the cis paradigm, and Hara Rose Satori, who shares decolonization and breaking the binary. We talk about cultural appropriation, spiritual elitism, and hierarchical wounds that can come up in facilitation and circles. So things like competition, jealousy, body shaming, hierarchy. And lastly, in that month, we talk about anti-racism and elevating people of color in spiritual circles. CJ Thomas is our guest speaker on that module. So really here, we're just diving into like the tip of the iceberg of this lifelong work of anti-racism and decolonization, and really looking at it through the lens of circle facilitation so that we can do this work as community leaders and not be creating a lot of harm unknowingly in the circles that we are facilitating. That month also includes a processing and integration week where all of the white folks meet with me and all of the BIPOC folks meet with CJ to kind of process and integrate all of that really deep work, because it is sometimes super heavy. And the third month, tying it all together, we talk about actually guiding the ritual. So what does it look like to guide a circle inside of the red tent, and how are you going to tailor that to your own personal facilitation style, to your unique gifts and skills and everything that you bring to the table? Because one of the things about the red tent that's really exciting is that it is very open and malleable and flexible. So you get to receive a framework of what it can look like, but also kind of go in and work with it and create whatever it is that is genuinely coming through you as your special and unique soul and heart medicine. So the training, I'm so excited about it. We have an awesome group of people. There is the opportunity to do one-on-one coaching with me. There's also 7 live group calls throughout the training, and a lot of fun ways that we are going to be connecting with each other for further integration and accountability, and just really community support as we move through the journey. So that is one thing that I'm doing right now to share the red tent magic. And the second, which is ongoing, I have a virtual red tent monthly membership. And there's a couple different levels that you can join at, but what this offers is a new and full moon ceremony every month where you get to connect with the group, you get to share, you get to be witnessed. We have ritual together. There is menstrual education and circle facilitation education as well. So that's with classes from me, as well as guest speakers that I bring in every month. And we talk about all things womb and menstrual health, and also a lot of the things that can come up when facilitating circles, how we can do this equity work, how we can navigate challenges, how we can be the best facilitators possible. So I created this kind of in response to the times and what I felt like is a real need for connection, community, support, accountability, as we continue to be isolated, so many of us, for so much longer than we expected. Like, this has been happening, going on for almost a year now, beginning of 2021. Here we are. So I created this container for those of us who are facilitators, educators, coaches, or even just for those of us who are beginning on our menstrual and womb health journey, to really have a container of people who are also on that path and want to support each other, hold each other, see each other, and really just be in the red tent space. Even if we can't be together physically right now, it never ceases to amaze me, the intimacy and the depth and the vulnerability that we co-create being in that space. So yeah, that's the virtual Red Tent membership.
It sounds amazing. And just being in your trainings, like, I mean, we can all hear from the way that you talk about it anyway. I mean, there's it's so rich and it's so deep, and there's just so much. And we've had CJ on the show, and she might have been the last one that I had on the show, talking about how to uplift women of color in this spiritual space, which is predominantly white. She's amazing, and she has a lot to teach. And so what an incredible woman to have in your training. And I think I saw that Allie is doing some things with her, like, incredible womb nourishment and all of that. And anyway, it really just sounds amazing. So congratulations on creating all of that. And it's a lot of work to get it all together to be able to offer it. And it's really awesome. You were talking a lot about, having physical spaces and all of the work that goes into that. And I'm assuming that is part of one of your programs, or there was something that you were talking about. But just, it's definitely something, if you're going to have these, if you're going to offer red tents and things like that, there's a lot of knowledge that you have to have from everything that you were just talking about, but down to the really physical aspects of, like, what are all of the supplies that you need, and the size of the team that you need to work it with you, and all of that. And I think that women that are feeling called to do this work, I think this is just, like, such an incredible way to learn from you, and such an incredible time to do it. Like I was saying, this is the time for us to, like, really dive in. And I don't know of any, like, I don't know of any of those types of spaces that are going on around here, and we don't have such a festival scene right in here, like in the city. And so I feel like you get more of this stuff when you go out and you're in environments where there is a lot of festival and all of that. And so I think it's like a really, for people who are feeling called to really ask, like, how can I bring this type of education and these type of supportive spaces to people who may be really detached from all of that and like in the city?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are so many places that we can serve through sacred menstruation. Like, yes, it's about like being present with your cycle and giving your blood back to the earth and these beautiful flowery offerings and all of this. And also, it's about getting resources to people who need them, like not just the education, but the physical resources like pads, tampons, period panties, cups. Like this advocacy work, it goes so deep. And the pandemic has really elevated that. Already, menstrual products, which really are necessities, are unbelievably expensive, and not everyone has access to them. So take this work, bring it into your community, bring a bleeding space to your community if that's accessible. Maybe what is more accessible is fundraising to bring some of these products to houseless communities or to youth or to under-resourced families who could use these products. So especially at a time when the disparity in wealth has been so magnetized with the pandemic and all of it, there are so many ways that we can bridge sacred menstruation into our communities and the world at large. So it's really important stuff.
Totally. Thank you for coming and sharing with all of us about that. How can we find you, and how can we get in touch? Are you doing that webinar again? Really, it's such an incredible educational webinar. I mean, you should make it available to people that are interested. They can just watch it.
I'm thinking to do that. I may have it available for a donation cost or something like that. But for now, you can find me on my Instagram, Priestessing the Paradigm Shift. And my website is priestessingtheparadigmshift.com. If you sign up for my newsletter, I send out an email every Monday, Menstrual Mondays, and we talk about some different aspect of menstrual health or what I'm doing. And yeah, that's the best way to stay connected with me.
I'll post a link for those of you that want to check out the training. I'll post it anywhere where you can see this video. And yeah, definitely, if you have any questions, please reach out. And Laura, it's so good to be here with you, and so good to be inspired about the work that you continually are doing. And I think it's really important. It was, I'm like I was saying in the beginning, like she activates things in me. I get really inspired about the work that she's doing, and I'm like, okay, how can I do my part? Like what? And so I've gone back to school in a virtual setting. I'm working on my music degree and my psychology degree simultaneously. But what's going to happen is sometime soon, hopefully, when we go back to being able to be together in person and all of that, I'm going to go back to school. And I haven't been to school and like on a school campus in a really long time. And just the idea of how can we bring some of that education to a school campus? How can we create sanitary, safe, comfortable environments for processing the things that we have to process as normal daily life, for women or for people who have wombs that bleed. This is something that's just real and, that we have to deal with. So yes, having them at festival spaces and having like a clean, safe sanctuary to go to. And then also, what about in everyday life? What about like in the city? Yeah. What about on a school campus? So that's where I am was looking at like how I can get involved and how I can help. And your program just sounds amazing. I'm sure I'm going to.
I love it. I love it so much, Jaime. And as you know, like, please keep connected with me. I am in full support of that vision and want to help make that a reality in whatever way I can. And you're so right. It's like, I mean, that's the constant question in festivals. It's like, okay, this is great, but what about in real life? And so that applies to the Red Tent and so many different aspects of those events. And it's true. It's like, okay, we can have a magic, beautiful, perfect Red Tent bleeding space here for 4 days, but really we need this in the middle of the city. Really, we need this at every school. Really, we need respect for menstruation in every single institution. So I love that. And I'm here for you in that project. So you just let me know.
I will for sure. Okay, let's see if anyone has any questions. We're broadcasting on a number of different platforms here. So I'm just going to take a look. It's always hard to do when live, but I do feel sometimes people ask, some really awesome questions and I don't see it later. Well, I'm not seeing anything at this moment, but thank you all for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Laura, for joining again and for being such a wealth of knowledge and education and inspiration. And so we will be back next Sunday. We're going to be here every Sunday. I'm going to be bringing, more magical people to share with all of you. Next Sunday, we're going to have Sal of the Crooked Path here in Los Angeles. And he's going to be the first male on the show. I haven't had any men on the show. So even for my own self, I'm like, okay, let me also just expand out. We're going to talk about men in witchcraft, because that's also another area where, we think that it's just women and is of course mixed with all the horrible treatment of women, of course, is blended right in with that. But it's important for us to see that there really are other people and there's other people who've been persecuted as well. So anyway, we're going to get into that conversation. And with that, I think that we're complete. And to you, Laura, and to everyone out there, blessed be.
Blessed be. Thank you.
Thank you.